pollution. The public is determined to tackle this issue, so is the Conservative government.
The Prime Minister's bluster, of course, we're not leaving the European Union today, but if we were, his deal on his terms, it would mean that tomorrow Scotland's fishing fleet would still be subject to the Common Fisheries Policy, but with added red tape and bureaucracy to get their catch to market. So shouldn't Scotland's fishermen use this upcoming election to stop this dreadful Tory deal?
Well, I completely disagree with the honourable gentleman. The Scottish fishing industry wants to leave the CFP and take advantage of the sea of opportunity that we will have when we become an independent coastal state. And it is his party that is standing against the interests of the Scottish fishing industry by wanting to remain in the European Union.
Speaker, I'm keen that the next generation are engaged with why climate change happens and what they can do to prevent its impact. Harrogate Borough Council is putting in place a scheme that gives every school child in the borough the opportunity to plant a tree, which will be both fun and educational. Will the Minister encourage other authorities or other bodies to offer this opportunity to every school child in our country?
Thank him for his question, and I commend Harrogate Council. I read I was about to say somewhere, the National Trust have said that a child today is 3 times more likely to go to hospital for falling out of bed than falling out of a tree. And I don't obviously recommend either activity, but there is no doubt that children who are insulated from nature are losing out. So I very much agree with the honourable gentleman. Working with the Woodland Trust and Community Forest, we are on track to meet our target to plant 1 million trees in English primary schools by 2020, and we committed in the 25-year Environment Plan to encourage children to be closer to nature in and out of school. The last week of November is National Tree Planting Week, and I strongly encourage members to plant trees with their local schools so that we can all celebrate together.
Dr. David Drew.
Our careers have somewhat been in parallel, and I'm very pleased to be here today. I had a slight interregnum in the middle of your speakership, but I'm pleased to be here to top and tail it, and we remain good friends throughout. The government committed to keeping the current level of farm spending to the end of this Parliament, which is obviously in the next couple of days. This party will commit to keeping that level of spending, and indeed with the new system even spending more, because it is going to be expensive to introduce it. Will the government make that commitment?
Well, the government, he's absolutely right, is committed to keep spending exactly the same until the end of this Parliament. The honourable gentleman is going to have to wait to see our manifesto to decide what will happen in the next Parliament. But I would simply say this: it is implicit in the Agriculture Bill, as he knows, that there will be a transition over a period of 7 years, and during that transition we will be rolling out the new policy, and we've already committed to fund the objectives of the Agriculture Bill.
Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Woodland Trust, of which I'm a keen member, believes that we can increase the amount of tree coverage by natural regeneration. And that, to me, seems to be the best way of doing it. How can we incentivise that within the new Environmental Land Management Scheme? Because that seems a good way of doing so.
I thank you for his question. He's absolutely right. Much of what we need to do to tackle climate change and restore nature involves rewilding or natural regeneration. And there are a growing number of projects around the country that are already delivering vast benefits. For example, Knepp Castle in West Sussex, where agri-environment funding has helped create extensive grassland and scrub habitats with huge benefits for declining bird species like the turtle dove and nightingale. As he says, the new Environmental Land Management Scheme will be transformative because it will make subsidies conditional upon the delivery of public goods like biodiversity, like woodland, like flood management, etc. It really could be the big thing that improves biodiversity in this country. And of course that means increasing tree cover, and it also means encouraging natural regeneration.
Bromfield.
Mr. Speaker, and can I join with colleagues in thanking you for everything that you've done to stand up for our democracy. Now, the government's Environment Bill didn't actually include targets. It only required ministers to set them. And those targets could be 15 years in the future, they could be lower than current standards, and they need be nothing more than aspirations. Now, the Prime Minister said he would enshrine the highest standards in law. Obviously, nobody believes a word that the Prime Minister says. But would the Minister agree that there should be a legislative commitment to non-regression from current environmental standards?
Thank you. The Environment Bill sets out a duty to set targets, and the actual targets will all be set in secondary legislation. This is quite clearly stated. It's had a lot of support from many, many organisations across the board. And the whole system will be overseen by the Office for Environmental Protection, which will have to look at the 5-yearly targets, reviewed annually. There's a very strict set of regimes within there, and the government have themselves given very clear indications about not reducing our environmental standards. That's absolutely not the direction that this government would ever intend to go in, and that includes comments made just last week by the Prime Minister about non-regression.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kindness in calling me today, your broader kindnesses to all of us, and for all your service from that chair. I want to raise an issue again, which I know is also of concern to you. Ministers know that HS2 and its construction will affect a good deal of farmland. They will also be aware, I hope, that HS2 Limited has not been as effective as it should have been, either in providing full and timely financial compensation for land lost, nor in making the practical arrangements necessary to allow farmers to farm properly the land they have left. Will my right honourable friend and her colleagues please make sure they engage with colleagues at the Department for Transport to make sure that the financial and psychological consequences to farmers affected by HS2 are properly mitigated if this project is to continue?
Of course, I'm happy to give the commitment to engage with colleagues in DFT on these important matters. It is, of course, vital that HS2 Limited does all it can to ensure that it meets its obligations in a timely way in relation to farming and environmental concerns.
Order. Questions to the... I have stretched the envelope as widely as I think is reasonable. Questions to the Right Honourable Member for Meriden, representing the Church Commissioners, and the Right Honourable Member for Carshalton and Waddington, representing the House of Commons Commission and Chairman of the Public Accounts Commission. Mr Patrick Grady. Tom Brake.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, the Speaker's Advisory Committee on Works of Art publishes an annual report which is considered by the House's Finance Committee. The Commission does not receive routine updates. The annual report for 2018-19 was published on the committee's website yesterday.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You'll be amazed I'm not asking him about electronic voting for a change. But this question was originally in the order paper in July when Winnie Ewing was celebrating her 90th birthday, and in a couple of weeks, on the 2nd of November, will mark 52 years since her historic by-election win and continuous representation of the SNP in the House of Commons. So I wonder if you can tell us if the Commission had been advised of any discussion that the Works of Art Committee has had regarding commemorating Winnie's immense contribution in this place with a portrait somewhere on the estate.
Tom Wright.
His question, and I am disappointed that he didn't manage to work electronic voting into it, but he will be pleased to know that the committee is conscious that Winnie Ewing is currently a notable absence in the Parliamentary Art collection and is investigating possibilities for the temporary loan of a portrait for display in Parliament, and will continue to search for a portrait painting or drawing to acquire for the permanent collection.
Mr Barry Shearman.
Speaker, can I just very quickly say what a joy you have been for all backbenchers, genuine backbenchers in your time in the chair. We started off a relationship very early on in your career here, and I just saw you improve as a parliamentarian step by step. People sometimes forget that great inquiry you did into special educational need under Tony Blair. But I also remember other very good things you did with me and others on anti-bullying and also the campaigns with All Party on autism. But can I say this? Someone should say today what you had to put up with in terms of the concerted press malicious campaign that was run against you and your family at a certain time in your career. It was a disgrace to British journalism and to the profession of journalism, because it wasn't the Red Tops, it was the Times, it was the Prime Minister's Daily Telegraph. It was journalists we should have expected better from. Some of us stood by you at that time, and we will continue to stand by you. You are a young man, you've got a career in front of you. I'm hoping you're going to do startling things. And I hope this miserable Prime Minister, who couldn't even pay tribute to the Father of the House yesterday, will put you in the House of Lords where your office deserves.
Quite right.
Well, that's extraordinarily kind of the honourable gentleman. I think he was going to ask about the Speaker's Advisory Committee on Works of Art.
I do like the range of art we have, but it should be more accessible. And why do we have to pay a surcharge in our shops to pay for your art?
Very good. He's a dexterous parliamentarian. He can always think on his feet. Mr. Tom Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that was probably a bid for a portrait of you to be provided in the House, so we look forward to that.
Justin Madders.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bray.
Good progress is being made on implementing the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme and the recommendations by Dame Laura Cox and Gemma White QC to improve the working culture of the House. Complainants with non-recent cases and former members of the parliamentary community not previously covered by the scheme were able to access the scheme from Monday the 21st of October this year, and a staff group is examining options for implementing the Cox recommendation on independent determination of complaints against members.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say, I don't believe the Commission are making good progress. It's been a year since the Dame Laura Cox report came out, and only last week have we finally got historical cases reopened. Now, recommendation 3 made absolutely clear that there needs to be an entirely independent process for investigating complaints of bullying and harassment that members of Parliament do not take part in. It's been a year. I think it's gone on too long. And does the member understand how important it is for staff to feel confidence in the system that members of Parliament are not involved in judging their own peers?
Well, I agree entirely with him that, there should be a completely independent process, and I regret that 12 months on that has not been resolved, but good progress is being made on that, and a group has made progress on it and expects to report back to the Commission later this year, so I would hope that by the end of this year that would in fact be resolved.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank you for the support that you've given to me as a relatively new member, but also for the visit that you took to Manchester after the Manchester Arena attack, which killed 2 of my constituents. That meant a great deal to the family and also to me as a local parliamentarian, so thank you for that. There's been a great deal of work done by the committee, but can I just ask, what work is being undertaken to give members of Parliament the adequate legal support that they need to carry out their duties? Many of us have been the voice of people that have been mistreated, calling out corruption, mismanagement and fraud. But when we go for help, when we ourselves the target of harassment, we are left wondering where that support is. Can you look into this very real issue that MPs are not bullied, harassed and intimidated and eventually come away from the responsibilities that they have as MPs representing their constituents?
Well, I thank him for that. If he perhaps wants to pass me on details if there are particular cases that he's referring to, but I am aware that in the past support has been made available to members of Parliament who've been put in the position of legal cases pursued against them, so I will follow it up if he's able to pass me the details.
John Werra.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Tom Bray.
The House Commons and Parliamentary Digital Service has made significant progress in digitising various parliamentary processes, which hopefully members are aware of, such as, for instance, the Members' Hub for tabling questions digitally. And something that members may not perhaps be aware of is that since July this year, Erskine May has been made publicly available online for the very first time and is available through the UK Parliament website.
John Werra.
First speaker, Mr. Speaker, I wish you and your family every happiness. I find it very hard to imagine this chamber without you, though I do hope the electors of Newcastle give me the opportunity to find out. you have been a great, reforming, inclusive, witty, stimulating speaker, both in this chamber and across the country. And your visits to Newcastle mean that you will be very fondly remembered by the people of my great city. And part of the reforms that you have instigated have been on the digital and technology front. And I do wish to congratulate Digital Services and the member for Carshalton on the progress that has been made in making us more effective technically. So the Members Hub, the digitisation of tabling questions, the support for Android. But there is still much, much more to be done if we are to be truly as effective as possible. And I know that Members of Parliament are very hard use cases to tie down, but participation in the development and design of digital processes is essential. So what will he be doing to ensure that new and returning members are part of designing processes that mean that technology empowers us as it should do all our constituents?
Well, can I reassure her and perhaps members here today that if they do have issues, for instance, about the way Members Hub works, then they can simply walk the short distance from here to the table office, who I understand on a monthly basis do review suggestions and possible improvements that members have drawn to their attention. And I know personally, from having raised an issue with them, that they have then reflected that in the way the system works. So can I encourage all members, and perhaps in the new Parliament we will need to remind the new incoming members of that fact, that the table office are there and will respond and review that matter on a monthly basis.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I put on record my thanks to you, Mr. Speaker, for your encouragement for myself in this House. I remember the first day I come here in 2010. I remember setting my name on the entrance as we come in, and also the handshake and the firmness and friendship that you showed. It probably put me very much at ease, Mr. Speaker. I thank you also as a backbencher giving me the opportunity and others the opportunity in this House to express ourselves on many occasions, and we've done that. I can also thank you for the encouragement and the guidance and the friendship that you give, and to your wife Sally and to your family. Can I say thank you so much? It will never be forgotten, not by me and not by many in this House, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Can I ask the honourable gentleman whether consideration has been given to encouraging more paperless routes to parliamentary procedure in an attempt to be an example to businesses outside on how to cut down and make the most of physical resources?
Well, I can reassure the honourable gentleman that indeed that has happened, and that there are further changes in the pipeline that relate, for instance, to committee web pages, legislation web pages, and indeed members' pages. So I think the sort of changes that he's seeking to introduce here in terms of making this a paperless environment are indeed in the pipeline and should be delivered, I hope, over the next few years.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Question number 4.
Dame Caroline Spelman.
Since this is my last set of oral questions, I would like to record my heartfelt thanks to my small team of staff, especially my constituency secretary, who has faithfully served me for 20 out of 22 years. I think, Mr. Speaker, we often forget that it is the staff who are on the front line of much of the abuse that we are receiving, and I really want to record my admiration for their fortitude. And I also want to thank the amazing staff I've had, Simon Stanley in particular at Church House, who supported me in this role. And in tribute, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank you for your kindness and your courtesy, unfailingly so, and especially at times of personal duress. I would like to single out your inspired choice of Speaker's chaplain, who has enriched the spiritual life of this place, but more of that later. Mr. Speaker, the Church of England Pensions Board has tabled a shareholder resolution ahead of the AGM of BHP Billiton on the 7th of November this month. It is the world's largest mining company, and it asks BHP to suspend their membership of trade associations that are not lobbying in line with the climate change agreement. And this is just the latest example of the church commissioners using their shareholder position to change company policy in line with the climate change agreement.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just as much as you will be missed and tributes have been paid to you, I know my right honourable friend will also be missed. And these are her last set of questions, and it's a pleasure in her last questions to be asking her about eco-churches. Because last year, Salisbury Diocese became the first diocese to be awarded the status of eco-diocese. And there are 10 churches in my constituency that have signed up to this project. But can my right honourable friend tell the House what more can the church do to help tackle climate change?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend's illustration, I think, shows that the church is consistent from top to bottom in its determination to tackle climate change. And I think today we really can celebrate the fact that Salisbury Diocese, with all that it's had to cope with, is indeed the first diocese to win an award for the entire diocese. These awards are provided by the Christian environmental charity Arocha, and perhaps upon hearing this, all members present might like to encourage their own churches and dioceses to become eco-churches and eco-dioceses, because I think this would then demonstrate that consistency from top to bottom across the church.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too pay warm tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Meriden. She is an absolutely magnificent woman. She has done so much, and I should know. And she's done so much. She's done so much on so many different subjects, and it's been great that she took this role on. It's not often a role that's wanted by many MPs in this House. I think she's carried it off with great panache, and we should be grateful to her. She's also done a lot on the restoration and renewal of this palace, and I think that will stand a testament to her when she's gone. I don't know what her favourite hymn is, but mine is Hills of the North Rejoice, River and Mountain Spring. Right at the heart of the Christian gospel is surely a belief that we must preserve the planet on which we live, creation that was given to us for future generations. Mustn't that be at the heart of all the decisions that the Church of England makes?
Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the honourable gentleman for his very kind words. I nearly invited my family to come and sit in on this last set of questions, but I think when they heard that description, there might have been a little heckling from the gallery, so it's with relief that they'll read about it without having the opportunity to heckle. But of course he's absolutely right, and the Church needs to set an example in terms of its stewardship of the Earth's resources, which we are charged to look after. And I certainly recognise that every one of us in this chamber has that absolute duty to make sure that we do leave this planet in a better place than we inherited it when we were born onto it. And I will just conclude my answer by saying, of course, I wish the honourable gentleman the very best with his candidature for the speakership, and whoever is elected speaker also, I would urge them in the forthcoming restoration renewal to think very, very hard about the future Parliament is a green Parliament.
And Dame Cheryl Gillen.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Before I answer my question, Mr. Speaker, may I just say to you, thank you for your friendship over the years. I don't always agree with you, but in this place, and may I refer to you as I always have, John, friendship is more important than agreement. So thank you very much. The NAO expects to publish its progress review on High Speed 2 in early 2020. The National Audit Office expects to examine progress since the NAO's last value for money study in 2016, the reasons for cost and schedule increases, and the risks to value for money which remain.
Thank for his response. In his bombshell report, Alan Cook, the chairman of HS2, admitted publicly that HS2 is billions of pounds over budget and years behind in its schedule. And quite frankly, with its poor corporate governance, with the rapid turnover of senior staff and ministers who are supposed to have oversight of this project, can I encourage the NAO to provide a real in-depth report into the financial operations and probity of HS2? And can this report be made available to Douglas Oakervie, who is carrying out the Oakervie report, because I do not think that the Oakervie review of HS2 should report until it has the advantage of the NAO analysis. Hopefully this project will then be cancelled or radically changed.
Well, of course, the National Audit Office will not get involved in the political arguments about whether this programme is wise, but they have already reported 3 times on HS2, and they have found that the cost and benefit estimates underpinning the business case were uncertain. They've addressed the weaknesses in the business case, and they've also addressed weaknesses in the estimate for the cost of land. So I can assure my right honourable friend that the National Audit Office will leave no stone unturned in ensuring we get value for money on this project if it proceeds.
Colleagues, I would like to accommodate all remaining order paper questions. However, there is also a consideration of those who are waiting for subsequent business, and I don't want to intend or be guilty of any discourtesy to colleagues in that regard. So may I appeal to colleagues on the paper who are being accommodated late to be pithy. Insofar as we've taken up time because people have been extraordinarily nice about me, that is very enjoyable for me, but it is from this point on, in this session, unnecessary. Martin Vickers.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Brexit is, of course, a major task for departments, and since 2016 the National Audit Office has published 26 reports looking at aspects of Brexit. Most recently, the NAO has published reports on the UK's border preparedness for Brexit and the implications of Brexit on the supply of medicines to the health and social care sectors.
I thank my right honourable friend for his reply. He and I represent neighbouring constituencies with very large Brexit supporting constituents, and we of course want to get Brexit done as quickly as possible. But can I ask him about the impact on the NAO and how they will approach the financial audit post-Brexit?
Well, I can say that the National Audit Office wants to get the Brexit work done as quickly and efficiently as possible, and they have been working with all departments to assess the potential impact on their financial performance and position of exiting the European Union. The exact impact in the current year may depend, Mr. Speaker, on the outcome of negotiations.
Michael Fabricant.
Question 7.
The Archbishops of York and Canterbury have many duties in relation to the northern and southern provinces of the Church of England, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is also the spiritual leader of the Anglican Communion, a global network numbering tens of millions of members. There is no doubt in my mind that both these men are both able and effective.
But both these men are overworked, Mr. Speaker. Now, my right honourable friend, indeed the whole House will be aware that 1200 years ago, Archbishop Higbert was the Archbishop of Lichfield. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that you could have a future role in your retirement as the Archbishop for Lichfield.
Canterbury.
No, Lichfield. We want him in Lichfield. And then the hard work done by the Archbishops of Canterbury and York can be shared. We have that precedent. We want him now.
Mr. Speaker, fortunately I did have a little advance notice of the tenor of the honourable gentleman's question, and he's absolutely right that for around 16 years, between 787 and 803, there was an Archbishop of Lichfield, and this arose out of the fact that King Offa in the Kingdom of Mercia struck a deal with the Pope, requesting an archbishop to be named to serve in his kingdom. But that deal involved sending an annual shipment of gold to the Pope for alms and supplying the lights in St. Peter's Church in Rome. So perhaps the honourable member for Lichfield might like to make a similar offer to the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I thank you for the veracity in which you have chaired this House and the firm way but the kind way in which you have held that office. We recognise your service but also the sacrifice you have made to this Parliament and our democracy. Question 8, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Church of England is involved in reconciliation work both at home and abroad, and most recently on the international scene the leadership of the Church of England has worked with the Roman Catholic Church on peace building in Sudan, convening a meeting of Sudanese leaders in the Vatican. And in fact the Archbishop of Canterbury identified reconciliation as one of the key priorities for his tenure.
I thank my right honourable friend for her reply and also wish her well in her retirement. Our communities are divided and so many people across our country are broken at this time. So I ask what the Church of England are doing to drive forward a process of peace and reconciliation for the future of our country.
Mr. Speaker, there is an active proposition to initiate a reconciliation process run out of Coventry. The Cathedral of Coventry has a mission for peace and reconciliation because of its heritage. The Archbishop of Canterbury has spearheaded this offer, and I don't know how much about retirement, Mr. Speaker, but I have offered to help with this process because I think there is no doubt that we do need to heal the divisions in our society. The Church has an infrastructure, a cathedral in every city, a church in every parish, and it has the necessary infrastructure to help us to do this.
Raymond Chishti.
Mr. Speaker, may I also pay a huge tribute to the Church Commission who's done an amazing job. With regards to paying tribute to the Archbishop of Canterbury and His Holiness the Pope, I was in the Vatican representing the Prime Minister. That work is amazing. Can the Church Commission agree with me? One of the key things that we need to do is ensure that our diplomats around the world have appropriate religious literacy training so they can carry on this work on religious literacy training, religious reconciliation work around the world.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words, and I certainly welcome him to this question time in his role as the Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief. And I believe that he can do an important work within the Foreign Office to deliver on the promises that were made, that officials will have the opportunity, well, will be actually required to undertake religious literacy training before postings to countries where it is really, really too important to understand the role religion plays in the culture and life of those nations.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you. What is the Church of England doing to help women leaving prison strengthen family and community ties? And with your permission, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of colleagues, may I say that we are hugely grateful to my right honourable friend for her service to us here and to the Church in her role as the 41st Second Church Estates Commissioner. She has listened and acted as a wise counsel and an advisor behind the scenes, both to the Church, the General Synod, to government, and to those many colleagues here who have raised concerns with her about the big questions of the day: persecution of Christians overseas, church, schools and buildings, and strengthening our communities. She has helped the cause of getting mothers' names on marriage certificates and has been a great all-round advocate for the role of faith in public life. Not forgetting, too, that she was our first female Second Church Estates Commissioner. She will, I am sure, continue to be a positive voice and a presence for people of faith outside this place and will be greatly missed here.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, those are such kind words. I will treasure them and really appreciate the thought went into expressing them. And certainly as regards the work of our prisons chaplains, and in particular the focus on ex-prisoners being reconciled into their communities. She's right. I did in fact host a meeting in Parliament with Bishops Christine and Rachel of Newcastle and Gloucester respectively, which had a focus on the great need that there is to provide a suitable transition for women as they leave prison and return to the community, and to address some of the long-standing issues from which they suffer. And I just commend the work of the Reunite Project in Gloucester and the Anna Wynne Women's Centre in Birmingham, for they're doing a remarkable job in helping these women make that transition.
Congleton has offered a beautiful tribute, but every word of it was richly deserved by the Right Honourable Lady. Sir Desmond Swain.
Fine.
Mr. Speaker, yes, this is a subject that my honourable friend has been very diligent in drawing to my attention. So I recently met the Minister for Digital and Broadband, and who is my honourable friend for the member for Boston Skegness, and we had a really positive discussion about the work the Church is doing to increase access to digital and broadband networks in rural areas. Honourable members may recall that the Church signed an accord with the government to put at its disposal all church buildings and land to try and make sure we can eradicate those not spots in rural areas.
This is an issue on which she has been most helpful and assiduous, as she has been in the discharge of every duty she has undertaken in the 20 years that I have known her. I thank her for that service and wish her all the best for the future.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what can be said in answer to that. But, honourable members present will know how, with what great affection the honourable member for New Forest West is held, affectionately known by most of us as Desi. There is no one I would rather entrust my life to in a tight spot than this remarkable, brave individual. But I did also just want, on the subject matter, to record the Church's welcome for the announcement made by the Secretary of State for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport of match funding with $500 million, the initiative by mobile providers to share masts. It doesn't deal with the shortfall where there are no masts. That's where the Church intends to help. But given the announcement the Secretary of State has made that she is retiring, I would like to record my grateful thanks to her for her work in this Parliament.
Johnson.
10, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we've seen, we have seen all too clearly, it's in the recent very heavy rainfall that it is quite often the moment at which you realise you do have a hole in the roof. And many churches have discovered that, sadly, through the theft of lead from the roofs of churches, it's only when the weather turns really inclement that thousands of pounds worth of damage is done, which small congregations simply don't have the resources to meet. So the Church is working closely with the police and other partners to raise awareness and encourage local parishes to take precautions such as roof alarms or smart water marking so that we can fend off what is organised crime.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I too join in the tributes to the Right Honourable Lady in this role and the other roles that she's had in this place, and say that I'm sad she's leaving, and I'm sad that she cited some of the abuse that she's received as one of the reasons that she's leaving this place. Just on the specific question, could I ask what work is going on to consider the replacement of lead roofs with other materials such as steel or zinc?
So, Mr. Speaker, thank the Honourable Lady for those very kind words. And indeed, with the full support of my staff, I did speak out about the abuse we face. And part of my legacy, perhaps, to this place will, I hope sincerely, those of you who returned will really do something about it, particularly tackling the wild west of the internet, where there isn't sufficient regulation on what is expressed there, although I do commend the guidance given by the Church of England about how to navigate the internet in a wise way. But, Mr. Speaker, on this point, it's important to share with colleagues, because theft from churches, particularly of roofs, is a matter that affects a lot of colleagues. There is new guidance that has been published by Historic England on non-lead metal roofs for churches to deter the risk of metal theft. And I think it is very important to know that even a Grade 1 listed building can be fitted with lead substitutes, which do not, therefore, attract the type of crime which I described at the beginning as causing so much damage and cost.
Mrs. Pauline Latham.
Number 11, sir.
Mr. Speaker, well, the legal position is that 16 and 17-year-olds are entitled to have their bans published and to marry in church. And I'm sure all honourable members who've been to an Anglican church wedding will know that moment that comes in the service when the priest does ask if anybody has an objection to the couple getting married. That is part of the marriage process. And indeed, when a young couple are preparing for marriage, they are prepared by the priest for a very, very profound decision they're making. But it does constitute a very small percentage of those who are getting married in Anglican churches, those of such a tender age.
Could I echo the words of my honourable friend for Congleton and reiterate that you will be missed, she will be missed when she leaves this place? Does my right honourable friend agree that given the international reach of the Anglican Communion, the Church of England's support for ending marriages of 16 and 17-year-olds in the UK would send a very powerful message to other jurisdictions and faith communities around the world?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier that the Anglican Communion does cover a very large number of nations and a very large number of people who do have different cultural norms from our own. But it is often the aid agencies who are very effective in handling the issue of child marriage through their health and education programmes. And I particularly wanted to commend the work of the Mothers' Union in this respect. They are active, for example, in the Southern Sudan with their finance and literacy programmes to make sure that families are not relying on dowry payments as a way to sustain themselves. In Kenya, there are dioceses which work with their community to prevent child marriage. In Ghana, similar, but also quite interesting, the Mothers' Union also works on initiatives to tackle child marriage in the United States of America, because there are 13 states where there is no minimum age for marriage.
Tim Lawton. Mr. Speaker, can I also pay my tribute to my right honourable friend? She and I came into this House on the same day in 1997, as you did, Mr. Speaker. We have shared many worthwhile causes together, and she'll be greatly missed. And one of those causes was, of course, marriage certificates, be it for 16 or 17-year-olds or any marriages, just to keep it in order, so that at last mothers' names, as a result of my Civil Partnerships Act, will be added to wedding certificates. So could she just update us with the progress that is being made ahead of the digital registration that will come in, whether it will be the case that in certain churches the Church of England has given its agreement to the manual writing in on hard copy certificates until the technology is available, which I'm sure is a welcome common sense measure.
Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his kind words. We did enter Parliament together, and in those early weeks when we didn't really have an office and we were adjusting to the long hours culture and we missed our children, and I was pining for my children, he had the kindness to make me hot cocoa late at night. I've not forgotten that early start. But to update the House on the position on marriage registration, he was the Member of Parliament who landed the prize of actually getting the change in the law of 1837, which was not allowing mothers the same right as fathers in terms of marriage registration. But progress is slow on the accompanying regulations. So he might want to join me in putting some pressure on the future government to complete the process of regulation, because actually there are practical steps that can solve this in the short term. The Church has offered quite simply to allow existing registration books to be used, and where it says father, the name of the mother can be put in brackets mother. So if it's going to take a while to get this into the digital age, at least in the short term, many mums who are hoping to have that new right can achieve that through new right through a simple, practical solution.
Andrew Rosendale.
Question 12, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. Yeah, this is the last question, and I would like to say that during my time as a Second Church Estates Commissioner, I have seen the Church of England transform its digital communications. And as part of its annual mission statistics, it shows that, for example, the Daily Prayer app is downloaded over 5 million times and used on average for 8 minutes per user per day, that our social media now reach 3.6 million people, and the Church Near You website allows people to Google which is the nearest church they can go to and the times of those services. And we have an Alexa skill device set up by the church which has been inquired of 100,000 times.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her answer, but also for her incredible job she's done as a second Church Commissioner. She's been truly amazing, a great friend to many of us, and I have fond memories of the Right Honourable Lady, not just in her current role, but also on many occasions in Switzerland on the annual visit for skiing, and I'd like to thank her for her friendship. The Church is central to all of our communities, and engaging with the wider public is ever more important. Could you tell us more about what the Church intends to do to ensure that wider engagement through the use of social media and digital is rolled out more widely across the whole country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his very kind words, and I must just for the record say that being Second Church Estates Commissioner was a great blessing. To be asked to do this job when I was invited to do so, David Cameron said to me, the thing about this role is, Caroline, you're only answerable to the Queen and God. What a privilege that is. So, Mr. Speaker, as so happened, I met the diocesan directors of communication yesterday at Canterbury Cathedral, all of them really aware of the transition the Church needs to make into a fully digital version of what it does today, and I have given an indication to the House of that. But for those of us who perhaps still like a hard copy of things to inspire us, I just draw to the attention of the House, since it will be a very busy time for honourable colleagues, it will at some point be coterminous with Advent, for which the Church has published a Follow the Star booklet, which honourable members are welcome to avail themselves of.
Well, that was magnificently done. I hope I can be forgiven for saying to the honourable gentleman, the member for Romford, and more widely to the House, as the honourable gentleman referenced Switzerland. And I'm on my last day, and he's given me my cue. The best thing about Switzerland is not its skiing, it's not its chocolate, it's not its watches, it's not its financial services. The best thing about Switzerland is Roger Federer. Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to pass my thanks to you on behalf of the Scottish MPs on this bench when you've given us the opportunities to speak for constituents that know that the SNP are not the only voice for Scotland in this place. And it's good for our Parliament, our country and our democracy that all the voices are heard. So I thank you for that. I'd like to ask my right honourable friend what conversations have been had with the department and indeed the estate in Scotland to make sure that the government's new initiatives on the shared rural network for mobile coverage and the exciting new developments on broadband mean that the estates in Scotland can be used and leveraged so my constituents benefit as much as constituents elsewhere in the UK.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to say that my responsibility only covers those of the Church of England, but obviously the Church in Scotland is part of the Anglican Communion, and the opportunity to use church buildings, spires and towers and ridges of hills of land that the Church owns is an obvious way to make sure in Scotland there are no more not spots.
Just before we come to the statement by the Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House, I think there is a point of order which I'm content to take now from Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to raise a point of order in relation to the early parliamentary general election bill, which we expect to receive royal assent today. Mr. Speaker, the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, of which I'm the chair, has been investigating the threat posed to this country by Russia. We've produced a report which, in accordance with the Justice and Security Act, we sent to the Prime Minister on the 17th of October for him to confirm that there were no classified matters remaining, and there ought not to be, because it's already been very carefully looked at by the Cabinet Office. That confirmation should have been received by today to thus enable publication before the House is dissolved. But I regret to say it has not. Mr. Speaker, we thus have a Committee of Parliament waiting to lay a report before this House which comments directly on what has been seen as a perceived threat to our democratic processes. Parliament and the public ought to have and must have access to this report in light of the forthcoming election, and it's really unacceptable for the Prime Minister to sit on it and deny them that information. Mr. Speaker, I raise this as a point of order in the hopes that the theme of your speakership, the championing of the role of Parliament in holding to account the executive, might be, through this point of order, as successful today as it has been over the previous decade.
It's not a point of order, Chair, but obviously the Treasury will. Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable and learned gentleman. He knows that it's not strictly a point of order for adjudication by the Chair, although the right honourable and learned gentleman's articulate efforts to raise the matter are, in my mind, perfectly legitimate. What he has said will have been heard on the Treasury bench, and I do understand that he seeks a response today. It is presumably of the essence and the utmost importance to him and his committee that any such confirmatory response is at the very least received before dissolution. And I would hope that as the Leader of the House is sitting on the front bench, we might make progress on this matter. It can be expedited, potentially, and the Leader might be willing to act as a messenger, or maybe more than a messenger, and we will have to see what the result is. But he has raised his point today, and it is potentially open to him to raise it on Monday, even on Monday, at a much later stage, or on Tuesday. But I hope that it will not be necessary for the right honourable and learned gentleman to raise the matter again. Further to that point of order, Mr. Barry Sherman.
This time is of the essence here. We've just heard about this with some considerable concern on these benches, and surely a stronger message must go through to the Leader of the House that the Prime Minister or a senior Cabinet Minister should come in the last few days of Parliament and put this right.
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that I'm sympathetic to his concerns, and I think it's fairly obvious to the Leader that I'm sympathetic to the concerns of the right honourable and learned gentleman. I am not myself privy to the rationale behind the absence of a confirmation. I don't know whether it is just an administrative matter, because, to be fair, Prime Ministers have a very, very, very large volume of matters with which to deal, whether it is a transaction of business issue or whether there is some substantive reason why the Prime Minister does not wish to provide the confirmatory response that the right honourable and learned gentleman seeks. I can't know which it is. Well, I think what I would say is that it is not unreasonable for the chair of the committee to seek that confirmatory response in this Parliament, or an explicit parliamentary explanation in the House as to the reason for its absence. That, I think, is fair. I do want to press on, but yes, point of order, Seema Malhotra.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Could I just seek your clarification, as this is a slightly unusual circumstance, just to confirm that the report cannot be published without that confirmation from the Prime Minister, or whether that is just a matter of best practice?
I think that that is the case, because it is, of course, the committee is not a select committee. It is a committee of Parliament, but it is not a select committee, and therefore different arrangements apply to it. It's encouraging to see both the right honourable gentleman, the member for New Forest East, and the right honourable gentleman, the member for Rutland and Melton, who have some experience of the committee and its responsibilities, nodding in assent. Point of order, Mr. Dominic Grieve.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, for your response. The position is that for it to be published, it must be laid before the House on the day when the House is sitting. And as long as that happens, it can be published and will be made available to the public. If it were to be published on the day when the House is no longer sitting, even before dissolution, we wouldn't be able to lay it. So we would not be able to publish it. And therefore, we were hoping it would be able to be laid and published on Monday. And it's the anxiety which concerns the apparent delay, with which we haven't been provided with an explanation, which has led me to take this point of order this morning.
Very briefly, point of order, Mary Chairman.
Concern on all of us. There is expertise here. This is a special committee, and what we don't understand is why this can't be published on the authority of the House. Why can the executive block this publication? Are they trying to hide something here?
Simply because the composition of the committee and its modus operandi are determined in a manner different from those which apply to a select committee, which it isn't. That's the factual answer. I understand his frustration, but I think the matter has now been fully ventilated. The Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House has displayed exemplary patience, but I don't think we should test it further. Statement, the Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House of Commons, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I don't need patience because proceedings in this House are always interesting. But let us now praise famous men. It was a privilege to propose you as Speaker in the 2015 Parliament. And now, in the reverse of Mark Antony in relation to Caesar, I come not to bury you, but to praise you. For that is the right thing to do when a period of long service comes to an end. And that is not to deny that there will be a debate about your term of office, as there are debates about the terms of office of other speakers in our history. However, I am very conscious of the good that men do is often interred with their end of service, and I think the good that you have done should be heralded, and that others at a later date will look at some of the criticisms that they may have, but now is not the occasion for that. In 2009, when you first addressed this House as a candidate for the speakership, you said that you did not want to be someone, but rather you wanted to do something. Your agenda was reform, renewal and revitalisation. And although I think the word modernisation is an expletive that I rarely allow to sound forth from my lips, there can be no denying that during your decade in office, you have worked tirelessly to achieve these objectives. As the 157th Speaker, you have been a distinctive servant of Parliament, both in this place and beyond, representing the House to audiences around the United Kingdom and overseas. And I think you share my conviction that politics is at its best when it is engaging. Your work with the United Kingdom Youth Parliament and your work with Parliament's excellent education team should be celebrated. So many schools from my constituency have taken advantage of this service, and I have always been impressed by the knowledge of the people involved. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that you had quite a battle to get the education building put up, and some people opposed you, but it has been a resounding success. During your speakership, it has been a time when our parliamentary democracy has been under intense scrutiny. We have been fortunate to have in the chair so accomplished a glottologist as you, in order that language, as well as the intricate and profound workings of Parliament, can be understood by everyone. I think the words chunter, mendicament, dilate, animadvert, and perhaps my favourite, susurrations, have been popularised under your speakership, and I imagine are now in common parlance in pubs and clubs across England, or at least in Boodles, the Beefsteak, Pratt's and the Garrick. But those sorts of clubs probably enjoy those words greatly. As you have dispensed your immediate duties from the chair, you have come to be known as the backbenchers' champion. Our main purpose as members of Parliament is to seek redress of grievance for our constituents, and you have been unswervingly diligent in your desire to ensure that all parliamentarians are treated equally, whether novice or hardened veteran. I cannot thank you enough for the help you gave to me to ensure that we could get the drug Brineura for a constituent of mine, when within about a week you called me in oral questions, granted me an adjournment debate, and then gave me an urgent question, all of which helped build up pressure on the government to act, to the great advantage of a very ill and very young constituent of mine. This is my view of what Parliament is about, Mr. Speaker, and I think you facilitated that for me in a way that other speakers may well not have done, and my personal gratitude, and more importantly, the gratitude of the family who have benefited from that, is, I think, a real tribute to how you have operated. You have allowed parliamentarians to seek redress of grievance, and that is basically where our lawmaking in this place comes from historically. The ultimate, the most important, the highest duty of the Speaker of the House of Commons is to be the champion of our House and its members, and to defend our right to freedom of speech in defence of our constituents. And, Mr. Speaker, you have done that. During your time, you have presided over what you yourself have termed the rumbustious Parliament. Now, as you step down from the office of Speaker of the House of Commons, having what is undoubtedly the highest honour that the House of Commons has in its power to bestow, I wish you a prosperous and successful retirement, and thank you and your family, Sally, Freddie, Jemima, and particularly the great Oliver, whom I know has more my view of modernisation than your own, at least with regard to wigs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Leader of the House for his statement? And I note that Business Questions isn't on this morning, but he did say that you'd allow us a bit of latitude. So could I ask one question through you, Mr. Speaker, and that is, when is the Parliament likely to return after the election? And perhaps he could answer that in his own time, whenever. But, Mr. Speaker, most people can read the basic facts about your life on your website, on various other websites. You're the first speaker since the Second World War to have served alongside 4 prime ministers and elected to the post 4 times. And I want to concentrate on my interactions with you. And those of us in the 2010 intake were pleased that the rules were suspended slightly. We were allowed to ask questions before we made our first speeches, and I think that made a huge difference to us. You spoke at and gave up a Saturday evening for the launch of the campaign to have a bust for Noor Inayat Khan, who was one of the special operations executive in Churchill's special group. Karen Newman sculpted that wonderful bust, which is now in Gordon Square. Noor was executed in the Dachau concentration camp, so it was important to recognise her. And you attended and spoke at and allowed me the use of a Speaker's House for the launch of the Sydney Goldberg competition. Sydney Goldberg was in the headquarters ship during the D-Day landings. And that's quite important, the use of Speaker's House, which you've opened up to civil society and charities. I think it's roughly 8 a week, over 150 a year, and that's really important for people to see what goes on in Speaker's House, and I'm sure many people will thank you for that, particularly as fielding a number of the questions as they walked through to the bed in the final room. We had to explain to them it wasn't you and Sally who slept there. Mr. Speaker, your friend since 1982, the Honourable Member for New Forest East, and you trained quite a lot of the Tory candidates, and I'm sure you've seen many of them here, and you've obviously trained them quite well because they've been quite argumentative towards you. But, Mr. Speaker, being in the chamber is what you have loved most, and I don't know, maybe they're going to patent your bladder. I mean, the sight of Ian and Peter checking your vital signs as you leave after a long session is quite interesting. But you've opened it up, as many people have said previously, to urgent questions. You knew which select committee we were sitting on, and you called people appropriately for urgent questions and statements. And I won't forget the phone call that you gave to me. I thought I'd done something wrong, actually. You picked up the phone and said, "Mr. Speaker here, would you like to come to Burma?" I think Joan Ruddock couldn't make it, and it was great to be on that trip with you, particularly as your groundbreaking speech at Yangon University before Daw Suu was elected. And we went to Mon State, and we went to the Legal Aid Clinic, and then a school, and there were people looking through windows with cameras, and they weren't actually following us. They were actually there, sent by someone else. But I remember you waving your hand and said, "Who are those people? Send them away." And they did go. They listened to you. But you are what the phrase is, behold the turtle. He only makes progress when he sticks his neck out. I think people will say you are a turtle on skids, because you commissioned the Good Parliament report, by Dr. Sarah Childs, and many of her recommendations have now been implemented, particularly on proxy voting. There was the landmark report that you produced on speech, language and communication needs for children, and now ICANN, the children's charity, has done a follow-up report, Burko 10 years on. And I hope it's made a difference, and they've seen the difference that your initial report has made. Of course, the Leader of the House has mentioned the Education Centre. Many of our schools have gone through that, and it's such a delight to walk through Speaker's Yard down to the Education Centre. It's made a huge difference to the understanding of Parliament. And I was privileged to also sit on your group for the Speaker's School Council Awards, and it was incredible to see children, the level of their entries and how they were actually thinking about other people and how they want to change society. And so it's a tribute to you that that happened. And of course, the Youth Parliament in 2009, you've chaired every single Youth Parliament and you've been to every annual conference. And it was incredible to see the way the members of the Youth Parliament have risen to the occasion. And I'm sorry that you won't be here for the next one on the 8th. The level of debate, as you know, is absolutely exemplary and something that we can learn from. But it's UK Parliament Week next week, the 2nd to the 10th of November. As part of my business questions, I'm adding bits of information. 11,400 activities, 15 in Walsall South, 11 in North East Somerset. So you've got some catching up to do. But education at the other end, you are Chancellor of 2 universities, the University of Bedfordshire and your alma mater, University of Essex. And I know you will continue to teach them about how Parliament can be opened up. You've opened up Parliament and gave Parliament as part of the golden triangle, as I see it, of accountability with the executive and the judiciary. Parliament is not the subservient partner, but under your speakership, the equal and relevant partner. And I would say that to the other side, that I think you did do your job as a very impartial speaker, because I know that some of us on our side actually sort of questioned you calling other sides first. So everybody thinks that you are an impartial speaker and have favourites one way or the other. But you'll be pleased to know that your ratings on the Parliament channel has gone up, and the word order is now used by parents around the country as the new naughty step. But finally, I want to thank your long-serving staff, Peter Barrett and Ian Davis, and Jim Davey, and those are in the outer office and those in your inner office. They have always been absolutely exemplary to me and to other members, whether I was a backbencher or on the front bench. And of course, we can't forget the great Sally, who's always been by your side and supportive of the work that you do. And we all need that person who will support us in the work we do, and particularly Oliver, Freddie and Jemima. And it was lovely to watch them in the gallery yesterday as they were looking down, almost in tears actually, some of them, and very nice for them to hear the tributes, because I know that they faced difficult time in the playground when you've been attacked. So, John Simon Burko, this was your life and